This here is also a pediatric feeding pump. This is the EnteraLite Infinity feeding pump for pediatric patients. It is a rotary peristaltic internal feeding pump designed to deliver programmed doses of internal nutrition solutions at selectable rates. It does have an easy to use display as well as easy to use interface and button panel. Along with your pediatric feeding pump, which is battery operated, when you first initially get your pediatric feeding pump, you may need to assemble your IV clamp pole. You do have two adjustment knobs. One here is your back adjustment knob. If you were to turn it to the left to open and release it, and this is the space that will mount onto your IV pole. And then this one here is the adjustment knob to be able to connect your clamp to the back of your pediatric pump. If you look here, there is a mounting hole position there. On the side of your feeding pump here, you do have your port for your power adapter. It is advised that when you first receive your pediatric pump, you should plug it up initially to direct power for up to 6 hours before trying to use it on battery power. It may take up to 6 hours as well to completely charge the battery, depending on battery depletion. First, we will connect our clamp to our feeding pump by inserting the knob adjustment into the hole set in place on the back of your feeding pump, and then turn it to the right in order to tighten and secure your clamp to the back of your unit as such. After your clamp has been mounted onto the back of your pediatric feeding pump, you may then mount your pediatric feeding pump to your IV pole. Once the pole is set into the clamp, you will want to tighten your adjustment knob to the right, and then tightening the clamp until your pediatric feeding pump is set into place. Here on your pediatric feeding pump face, you do have your pump door, cassette door. You do have a release button here on the bottom where you would need to depress slightly in order to raise your pump door. This here is your pulley in which your Zevix pump set will be placed in your cartridge system, will be placed in this receptacle here. Your Zevix cartridge feeding bag for pediatrics is also single patient use only. You will need to discard the bag every 24 hours or sooner if needed. Your pump set will have your nutrition bag in where you will need to fill your nutrition, your cap here to open and close when filling your nutrition. You do have the tubing that connects to your pump cartridge. If you look closely at your pump cartridge, on one side you will see here a water droplet. That is the side that you would need to squeeze when you do have your nutrition filled in order to prime your pump set before connecting to your pediatric feeding pump. next step we will do is connect our feeding pump to our unit once we fill our nutrition. We will use water again as an example of nutrition. It is advised to use liquid nutrition only. After your nutrition has been filled, you may cap off your bag to make sure it is sealed. The bag should hang, your bag, once capped off, should hang at the level of the pump door or above. Before connecting your cassette around your pulley and placing into the cassette receptacle, you want to prime your tubing. To assist with easy priming, we will hold our cassette in this upright position. Right on the side where we have our water droplet, we will squeeze the hardened piece which is directly beneath the water droplet. Doing this action will help to prime your tubing before connecting to the machine. So currently I'm squeezing it to assist with priming, making sure nutrition is going through the pump cassette all the way through to the end of the tubing, connecting where you would connect the piece to the patient's internal feeding tube. You would like to ensure that there are no air holes or air pockets within the nutrition in the line. Once you have primed your tubing, you may stretch the tubing of the cassette around the pulley, sliding that back into position into the cassette receptacle, and then closing your door, making sure the door is completely closed. If your door is open, when you try to power on or start your machine, you will have a open door error message, which will display that the door is open and it will need to be closed. Before we continue to turn on our pediatric feeding pump, we will plug in our power adapter into the side of your feeding pump, and then as well into the power receptacle. Once your pediatric feeding pump has been plugged in, your unit may power on. After plugging in pediatric feeding pump to the power receptacle, you would like to power on your unit. You do have an off and on button here, which will help power on or power off. To power on or power off, you would have to press and hold it down for 1.5 seconds. That is off. And that will be on. Every time you power on, your screen will go through a self-test and a display. After it cycles, then you may go ahead and set your parameters or your settings for your feeding cycle. In order to set any of your feeding rate or dose, you do have a button here. To select the rate and set the rate, or to select the dose and set a dose, you will need to press this button once. It will show display dose. Then you may use your up and down arrows to set your dose. completely to be fed during the patient's cycle. If you would like to set a rate, you would press the same rate dose button again. Make sure your display would display rate, and then use your up and down arrows to set your adjustments. For pediatric use, you would have smaller increments of milliliters feeding. So this starts at 1/10 of a milliliter and will increase all the way to 600 milliliters, which is the full rate milliliters per hour that the machine can handle. To clear a rate or a dose or volume total at any time, you would have a clear button up here to your right corner. If you press the clear button during any displayed function, currently it displays rate, we would press clear, and that would clear to the minimum value that you can set within that selection. If I would like to clear the dose, to set a new dose, if I press my rate or dose once, and then I move to my clear button and press my clear button once, that will clear the currently programmed dose to the minimum value that you may be able to set in your dose selection. If your tubing were to still have air within the line after you have primed it and connected it to your pump cassette receptacle and close your pump door, when your unit is powered on, you do have a prime button directly beneath the on-off button. In order to continue to prime, once everything has been set, if you press the prime button down and keep it depressed, that will begin to allow the unit to flow at its maximum rate so that nutrition will flow through the line, through the tubing, to the end of the connector where it will connect to the patient's internal feeding tube. After all air has been evacuated from the line, you may go ahead and stop holding the prime button in order to stop priming. Underneath your prime button, you do have your run and your pause. Your run and pause button here will run or pause any action in order for you to check your line or your feeding bag, or even to check your volume total. Volume total will display two volumes. If you press volume total once, it will display the current volume that has been fed to the patient in the current feeding cycle. If you press the volume total button twice, it will give you the total volume that the patient has been fed with many amounts of cycles. Above your volume total, you do have a feed interval. Your pediatric Zevix internal feeding pump allows you to program a feed interval. For instance, if you have a selected rate of 50 milliliters per hour, which we will set, so we'll press rate, select 50 milliliters per hour by holding our up arrow until we reach the desired value. Then we will set our dose to 100 because we would like our cycle to be 50 milliliters per hour at a complete dose of 100 milliliters. So we will hold our up arrow until we reach our desired value of 100. Once you have set your rate and your dose, then you may go ahead and select your feed interval. When pressing your feed interval, it will display none at first. None will signify that there is no feed interval selected at this time. And if you were to run your selection of rate and dose, it would run at 50 milliliters per hour until it has a complete dose of 100 milliliters and then stop. If you were to use your up and down arrow while in the feed interval mode, then you will be able to set a value up to 24 hours. For instance, if you would want to set a value which is displayed in hours and minutes of 6 hours, then our feed interval will be 50 milliliters per hour for a complete dose of 100 milliliters, and then it will continue that same prescription after 6 hours has elapsed. If during any time your feed interval is selected, when one cycle has been fed to the patient, your display will display the number of hours and minutes counting down to the next feeding cycle. If you do not want to set a feed interval, then you would change your value to none, or as well press clear, and that will change it to the minimum value set, which is none. To feed your patient, once your nutrition has been filled in the bag, your tubing has been primed, your cassette has been set into the cassette receptacle, you have set your rate, you have set your dose, then you may go ahead, connect to the patient's enteral feeding tube, and then run at any time. To pause any action, you would press pause. If you do have a low battery display here on your display, your low battery will signify that you have approximately 1 hour of battery life operation left. You will need to get to your power receptacle or power outlet. Make sure your power plug is plugged in and it is plugged into a power outlet properly and charge. It may take up to 6 hours to completely charge depending on battery depletion. If you do have any errors that say ER with a digit or ER with a letter, you would want to clear all values, reset your rate, reset your dose, make sure you check your nutrition in your feeding bag, reprime your tubing, making sure there is no hardening in the tubing and no kinks or cracks, as well as no air holes, and then continue again with your run and with your running your feeding cycle. If your error were to persist, you would want to change to a new bag and then continue again. If after changing to a new bag, your pediatric feeding pump still displays an error message, you will need to contact Advocare Systems in order to have a new feeding pump delivered for your pediatric patient. If you do have a run to feed error, that will signify that you have been in the hold or in the pause mode for too long. Then you would go ahead and let you know that you want to run your action. If you press run, that will clear your alarm. If you do need to continue to check any of your tubing or your feeding bag, then you would go ahead and press pause again. Your pediatric feeding pump does have a memory, so if you were to power off by holding it down for 1.5 seconds, it will still remember the previous setting. So whether or not you have powered off or powered on or disconnected from your power receptacle, it will still remember the setting from the previous feeding cycles. In order to change any of your previous feeding cycles, you would want to either select the option you would like to clear by pressing that option, or if you're to hold the clear button down for 3 seconds and wait till it beeps, if you want to clear all options, your rate, your dose, and your feed interval at one time without having to do it separately by entering each function individually, you may press and hold your clear button down for 3 seconds. Once you press and hold that down for 3 seconds, you will go ahead and clear all information stored. Feed interval, volume total, rate, and dose. So as previously mentioned, if your cassette door is open, it will say shut door if you try to run. So in order to clear that error message, you would like to close this and then press your run or pause in order to clear the error. If it says load set, that means your Zevix pediatric feeding set and cartridge has not been set into your cassette receptacle. If it displays low battery, we said you will have approximately 1 hour of battery life operation left, where you will need to get to a power outlet to plug in, and it will take up to 6 hours to fully charge. If it says no food, that means that your nutrition has been depleted. You will need to refill your nutrition up to desired milliliter dose, and then reprime your tubing, reconnect your cassette into the cassette receptacle, and then set your rate and dose after priming and connecting to your patient. If it says no flow, you would want to pause your unit at any time, at a given time, and then check your bag for hardening of nutrition in the line or blockage in the tubing. If kinks or blockage does persist, either roll the tubing in your fingers where the hardened or blocked nutrition is to loosen, or change your pump set to a new set. If it says dose done, that means your complete dose selected has been completely fed to the patient. You would go ahead, check your nutrition, clear your totals, and then go ahead and run after priming your tubing. And if it says next dose, that means that you have selected a feed interval, that your cycle has ended, and your next dose will be in the displayed hours and minutes that will be displayed on your display. If it says check, CHEK, you would want to check all nutrition, tubing, and settings, and then restarting before contacting Advocare Systems. If your check or error messages do continue, then you may contact Advocare Systems and a technician will come out to replace your pediatric feeding pump as soon as possible.